Good morning to you, and thank you for joining us. You're listening to Smooth 98.1, Smooth Breakfast with Valentine.
And Ayo Mairo Ese. Good morning, Lagos.
Good morning. It's time for us to go into Freshly Pressed 981, where we give you detailed analysis of our newspaper stories. Joining us in the studio this morning to do just that, we have Nnamdi AK. Good morning, Nnamdi.
Good morning, Lagos.
Good morning. And special thanks to Tunde for joining us again after his long sojourn. Welcome.
Thank you guys. Morning, Lagos.
Good morning.
Yep.
Good morning, Mr. Ceee.
Good morning, Vegas.
Welcome. Mr. Ceee on Twitter. Tunde Okufi is at Big Coves. Nnamdi is at Nnamdi AK. We can send messages through WhatsApp, through Twitter, and through YouTube. WhatsApp number is 0809 444 0981.
And of course, on YouTube, we're at Smooth 98.1 FM. Please search using the search box. You can use the live chat option to send us messages during the show. On Twitter, it's at Smooth 981 FM. Use the hashtag Freshly Pressed 981 so we can track your messages.
Our first story is taken from the Punch newspaper. El-Zakzaky discharges self from Indian hospital as the DSS is expecting the cleric. He's expected to land today in the country. Mr. C, your thoughts on the story?
Okay, so what has happened is truly unfortunate, but we had an inkling of what would happen from the moment the court granted bail.
So what do you speak of? What happened?
Now, we're not sure what happened because they're differing accounts. Now, the government's position is that El-Zakzaky, upon reaching India, became unreasonable. They claim he asked for his passport back. He asked to be put in a 5-star hotel. He asked for free movement and to be allowed to receive all manner of visitors. That is the government's account. Now, the account of the IMN is he was literally detained in India, and his doctors, who he believed would be allowed to supervise the treatment process, were not allowed to do that, and that they insisted on using doctors unknown to him. Now, the truth of the matter is, from both accounts, the truth will lie somewhere in the middle. But what is disturbing is that the conditions given by the Kaduna State High Court have not been complied with. Now, the question is, what were those conditions? The defendants, that is El-Zakzaky and his wife, El-Zakzaky, were to be accompanied by operatives of the DSS and officials of the Kaduna State government, and that he was to remain at the Vedanta hospital until he makes a complete recovery. Now, it is crystal clear that the treatment process never even started. Now, the question then arises, since he was the one that insisted on returning back, what is then the status of the bill that was granted to him? Can he travel out again? Because he's been reported to have suggested that upon his return to Nigeria, he will look at other destinations with his doctors and fly out. But my understanding of the court order was to a specific location. So if he's to travel out again, he needs another court order or a variation of this court order.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. C, for your analysis. We have messages regarding this story.
Yes, Solomon says we must remember that the cleric was not given bail but granted permission to travel and take care of his health. He's the first person to be concerned about his health, so if he chose to return, so be it. However, it is sad that a lot of money has been expended and the man is still ill. And we have from Vincent Mecca, who says the legal teams from the government and IMN leaders should have tied up the type of treatment to be given him. Why are we doing things in a tacky and hasty manner in this part of the world?
So adequate preparation saves money, right? In any business, in business of government even.
Yes.
From the Vanguard newspaper, we take this story. Osinbajo, the vice president of Nigeria, blasts discos distribution companies for underperformance. He berated the power distribution companies, accusing them of underperforming. And we know that the discos have been complaining, for lack of funding, lack of cooperation on the part of the government, and also lack of adequate infrastructure to absorb, which is a major complaint on the generating companies, saying that the discos lack the capacity to take as much as they give. Your thoughts on this story, Nnamdi?
I mean, just as you pointed out, the problems are not as simplistic as this story seems to present. I don't want to accord that particular sentiment to the vice president himself. I'm sure he understands a little more deeply what the flaws in the power generation and distribution and transmission systems are in Nigeria. But as I understand it, I mean, look at the context of the story. The VP was making this statement while commissioning the 2 by 60 mega. I'm not even sure what MVA is, but I mean, those of you out there who know what it is,
Megavolt
know
amps.
you're a good man. Megavolt amps, and basically he was commissioning a substation and associated transmission lines, and something that has been spoken about frequently is the inability of the transmission company of Nigeria to evacuate and wheel power from the generation companies to the distribution companies. And when they speak about 8,000 megawatts of generation and 7,000 megawatts of transmission capacity available to discos, it fails to mention all the things that happen in between that prevents discos from properly operating. What they've tried to reduce the argument to is failure of metering. And while we know that that's a huge issue and there's a lot of corruption going on,
And there's a huge cost to it.
And there's exactly, but at the same time, there's so much we can't get into about why that particular problem is ongoing, including the fact that these discos have huge legacy debt, huge operating costs, heavy financial constraints, which have been occasioned by the botching of the transition from state-run to privately held companies in this electricity sector. So I think that this story, while it's obviously made the headlines, fails to spot some of the more important issues in this particular area.
This has been a recurrent conversation, to be honest, regarding power. We hope that eventually the government will find a way to make it work, because there's going through the route of examining the problems they've had, that's the discos, trying to address the issues between them and the gencos, and then getting the meter asset providers to actually do the work.
Even down to gas, the gas companies that feed this entire system have also complained that gas is not being sold in Nigeria at a proper, what's the word I'm looking for, at a commercially profitable rate.
Thank you, Nnamdi. Our next story goes to you today. This from Thisday newspaper. Lawan, that's the president of the Senate, Dr. Ahmed Lawan, he urged President Muhammadu Buhari yesterday to lay before the National Assembly the 2020 appropriation bill latest September ending for its passage by December. At the start of their tenure, they've actually mulled, or the executive arm of the government had said that they would desire for the budget cycle to come back to normal, January to January. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, desire, and we've had that desire for how long? I mean, living in Nigeria is a bit like Groundhog Day. The same stories, the news cycle, especially around the politics, is exactly the same. And you wonder whether we're stuck in this evil cycle. Many years on, we're still in exactly the same situation regarding how we prepare budgets. When Buhari won his first mandate in the first term, preparing the initial budget took an excruciating amount of time. It was very painful, and the reason given at the time was it was zero-based budgeting. They're building it up from the ground up and promised that subsequent cycles will be better, but it really hasn't gotten better. Lawan describes this as the trend. No, it's not a trend. Unfortunately, in our country, it's the norm for the budget to come much later than usual, and it's not ideal. So here we are again discussing this and hoping that we can get things done in good time, that the appropriation budget arrives at the Senate in a timely manner, such so that they can deliberate on everything and we have a budget to work with from the 1st of January. But let's hope that does happen, because in the end what we end up doing is we end up rushing these things. The legislature, remember that the legislature and the executive will still haggle over this. They'll still
Exactly.
argue. There'll be problems around constituency, the legislature's constituency projects. There'll be arguments around what the executive wants to spend money on, and in the end we end up operating a delayed budget. Between them, we're working with the supply budget, interim spending budgets, but that's all we can do is talk about it and hope that we can break out of the cycle and improve.
We have messages here though. Comrade Henry sent this one on WhatsApp. He says, "We do not have to condemn El-Zakzaky's action. Do you know that the presence of your loved ones besides you on a sick bed can actually hasten your healing, just as the intimidating conditions at the hospital can, as well worsen one's condition?"
All right, thanks a lot, Comrade Henry. And then Shegun says, the way these discos won their bids to distribute power was the foundation of their failure. And then we have Ojo here who says, on the El-Zakzaky case, I feel their plans against the government failed. The international conspiracy didn't work out.
Interesting.
Okay, let's move on to our next story.
Our next story is from the Guardian newspaper. Buhari promises to boost healthcare commissions. NAF a reference hospital in Daura. We all know that that's where he's from. It's interesting to see that he's making a statement yesterday in Daura, Katsina State. He restated his administration's commitment to improve health facilities, equipment, and services in the country, saying rural dwellers will be given special attention to better healthcare. Health in itself, I'm not sure it gets as much as 3%.
Exactly.
From the budget.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what significant difference does this make?
One healthcare center, obviously not a lot. Now, if they keep it up, perhaps So many people may raise their brows. Oh, this is in Daura, but I have no problem with that as long as there is a concerted effort to open up facilities of this kind across the nation. But the truth is, we're simply not dedicating enough, like you pointed out, enough of the budget. We're doing barely. I doubt we're doing anywhere near 3%. Of overall spending on healthcare, and there's no way we can improve the healthcare sector. Our president, from time to time has to leave the country, for medical checks. Now you can see you're at liberty to take care of your healthcare wherever you want and at the best places. But we should also strive to make one of those best, to make make that available to everyone, because not everyone is within that privileged class. So they've opened up this reference hospital. A reference hospital that essentially can deal with a wide range of issues, can accept emergency and non-emergency issues. So typically, you probably go to a community healthcare center, and when they can't deal with it, or when things get to a certain stage of specific procedures or specific equipment, they'll send you to the reference hospital. So again, they should keep. I don't want to say it feels like token. Like a token action towards healthcare, but it does feel like that when you realize that the vast majority of people don't have access to qualitative healthcare, and the real evidence, it's not promises, the real evidence of how seriously we take things like healthcare and education is actually how much money we dedicate to it versus other things, versus recurring expenditure, versus security. Security is important, yes, but we all agree and we all know that thing has become a bit of a scam, to be honest. So we need to stop paying it token attention and give it real attention and back it with budgeting.
Thank you, Tunde.
Thank you, Tunde. A comment here from YouTube. I totally agree that that's from Emeka Onelum. I totally agree that these discos have been a total failure. Their so-called challenges you're mentioning are well known before they took over these companies. Let more players come in. So that's in response to the disco story. And then we move on to our next story here. Confusion over Buhari's stance on food imports. Central Bank of Nigeria's autonomy. This is from the Guardian newspaper. I'll come to you, Nnamdi, for this one. We have this story. Of course, the news broke out from a statement the president made on Tuesday when he hosted APC governors in his home country of Daura, his country home, in Daura, and he mentioned that there will be restrictions on forex on imported food. Now, a number of criticism, a number of people have come out to speak about this, and in today's report, we look at the challenges that have been identified with this statement. Can you please take us through this?
Okay, it's quite a long story and also a little deep, so you permit me a little bit of time. It's nothing exceptionally new, right?
It's a serious one.
It is
serious. Yes.
Now, I mean, primarily, what the story refers to as confusion is the fact that the data and statistics suggest that Nigeria is a long way from being from having food security.
Yes.
A very, very long way from being food sufficient.
Which, by the way, the president had said we had achieved full food security in his statement.
Well, he was speaking about food security in particular areas. There's no way anybody in Nigeria can come out and say we have complete food security. We're still dependent on imports to a very large extent. But in particular areas, they've come out with new policies to encourage domestic production and to shift us away from an import culture. Now, the story has pointed out that it's pointed out certain reasons which, whoever the writer is, seems to believe have caused this shift by the federal government in its policy, including the fact that the nation's foreign currency reserves are dipping, and the fact that there is quite low yield on fixed income securities, so such as T-bills and bonds issued by the government, which of course are affecting Nigeria's foreign exchange reserves. But nonetheless, right, some of the takeaways I took from this are that a lot of commentators and people involved in the sectors affected by this new policy are arguing that you cannot fix every economic issue using monetary policy, right? Now, monetary policy is basically policy designed to stabilize price and to repose trust in the nation's currency by targeting inflation and interest rates. Already people might be a little bit more familiar with the role of the central bank of a country in this, when you note some of the trolling that President Trump has meted out to his central bank
for holding
Can we talk
interest
about?
rates low.
Can I ask around talk about the influence of the president on
the Reserve Bank.
on the central bank
Right.
of Nigeria when it's meant to be
Exactly.
an independent, autonomous body?
That's the principal issue in this story, which is that a lot of people are confused about the central bank's autonomy and whether its independence is being compromised by the government's continuous interference in monetary policy decisions. The truth about it, though, is that in Nigeria, well, it's not so, I don't think, it's
Not
so
so
straightforward, in the sense that the Foreign Exchange Monetary and Miscellaneous Act, right, which is an act for the regulation of foreign currency movements, which obviously has a huge impact on monetary policy, it's an act of parliament. It's an act of the Nigerian legislature, and it empowers the minister, who is an appointee of the president, to make certain decisions in that respect. And it also, within that act, if you look in there, it's there by design that the Central Bank of Nigeria Act, in all its ramifications, should be read in line with the Foreign Exchange Monetary and Miscellaneous Act. So it's not so straightforward. So some of these, you have to get a little bit technical to whittle out the differences and to figure out exactly where the president has sway and where he doesn't have sway. And especially in this time when there is no minister of finance or equivalent, you do wonder whether the president doesn't have that authority to exercise the power that have been arrogated to such a minister, since essentially he's fulfilling those functions right now. But the things that really, really bother me in this story, so I just want to point out a few. There's a point where someone is claiming that many of the food items are already on the prohibition list of the CBN. That's the food items that have recently been announced. And the CBN needs to identify additional items, as well as specify the harmonized system codes in detail. So that harmonized system is like a data bank of all the restricted foods on the import list, to avoid a backlash. And then he goes on to say the expatriate community should also be considered when talking about food, as they cannot be forced to take local delicacies. And this blew my mind. I don't want to even go into it. I don't even want to get into it at all.
Thank you, Nnamdi. Unfortunately, I have to move on to the next story, but
Okay. Yes. Please do go on.
Thanks a lot for your commentary. We have comments around this story on Twitter around the import ban on the FX restriction on importation of food. So says on food importation, I guess what PMB planned was to discourage the importation of staples that Nigerians eat and encourage increased production within Nigeria. Our culture of importing everything is the issue here. But another question around that is that, are we able to sufficiently meet the demands of Nigerians?
It's not even a question. The figures indicate Nigeria is consuming
We're not yet there.
millions of tons of these products and only being able to produce low percentages, 5-7%, in each of the different categories. So
Right.
it's not a
Thank you.
question.
Thank you very much.
Dr.
Nnamdi.
I says, very quickly says, if the president stops his foreign medical trips and starts using the Daura hospital, that would be a boost to improving Nigerians' healthcare. But will that happen? Healthcare sector is collapsing. We sense the sarcasm there, but thank you very much, Dr. I, for your message.
All right, let's move on to our next headline. I'll go to you, C, for this one. Some graduates, shocking one. Well, I don't know if it's shocking for many Nigerians, but some graduates can't recite English alphabet. And this is coming in from the Director General of the National Youth Service Corps, NYSC, Brigadier General Shuaibu Ibrahim. He highlighted a few challenges that the NYSC have encountered with some of the graduates who have come to serve. Can you please take us through the story?
Okay, so this is nothing new. I remember when I did NYC close to 20 years ago, there were corpers at camp who could not fill the forms. One actually asked me, please, what do I write here? And what was written, what he was supposed to write
And this person is
was
a
his,
graduate.
What's his name?
was his own name. So it's nothing new, and it's just indicative of the steady decline in educational standards in the country. We have schools that we don't know what they're teaching them because even the teachers are half-baked. Remember the test Adams Oshomole instituted in Edo State when he was governor, and you had a teacher who couldn't read an affidavit she deposed to. So I think the NYC is hamstrung because really they just accept these individuals who suggest that they've gone to school. But it points to a larger issue. Some of these guys are presenting fake credentials, but some of them, their credentials are actually original and genuine. And it then raises a question. How do they go through the educational process and end up this bad? So to resolve this, we need to go back to the root, which is primary education. If we do not get it right, we will continue to read stories like this. We will continue to talk about it, and the cycle will never end.
Thank you, C. Tunde, you want to say something?
Yeah, I also wanted to point to something else. To me, the fact that someone would arrive at NYC without being able to read, and I have met, a few of them, is indicative of the fact that, merit in this country has collapsed. We do not run a system that is built on merit at all. In the country, it's almost like one part, certain parts competing against the other part, and therefore certain areas of the country don't mind pushing and producing so-called graduates that cannot, and actually not graduates, but they need to turn out a certain quota, are undeserving, and they will get appointments, they will get jobs, they can't function. It's a lack of, there's no merit in our system. There is none. If there was merit, if you like, turn out graduates that can't read, when they can't get jobs, then they will learn why they didn't get jobs and
Thank
adjust.
you very much.
Do you know the most scary bit of that story is? Well, it's not really that scary. Just surprising to me that there are about, the story knows that there have been 4.6 million Nigerians who have participated in the scheme since inception. That's 46 years ago. Do we really only have on average about 100,000 Nigerians participating in the NYSC?
It's been progressive over the years.
It has been.
Yes.
No, but I'm saying doesn't that worry you a little bit that there's only 4 point something million, and then we talk about these vast numbers of Nigerians who need to be gainfully employed and so on and so forth.
It was surprising, and again, it goes back to in terms of accuracy of numbers when it comes to data and reporting as well. But also important to note that at this point, he mentioned that they can only cross-check certificates. There's not much they can do apart from what you said, Tunde, which is check unqualified.
So the NYC, just to add this, they've said that they will blacklist any core producing institution that presents unqualified persons.
Thank you.
Now, my question is this: do they have the power to do that? Because it's only a core.
They're gonna explore ways. It's a conversation that's probably just started.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in your opinion, do you think it's a good idea, though?
No, it is a good idea, but we have this military. We're still dazed by this military rule, and people think they can just get up and do what they like.
Yes.
That's actually a very fair point. How do you blacklist?
Because
you take away their licenses.
They didn't suggest that they will go to court. They just said they will blacklist.
Thank you very much.
Sweeping statement, yeah. Vincent Mecca from Adeba says, obviously Nigeria is importing virtually everything, even things that we have in surplus. I support our government on curtailing things being imported into
We
the
don't have
country.
anything in surplus regarding food, please.
Okay, let's move on to our next story. Today, a woman arrested for locking orphan in dog cage.
Mm.
Big story over the week. A number of us have seen the video. A number of us saw the video. Rotus, I have to mention him because he was one of the advocates for this, pushing the video out and calling for the identification of the woman. Just as a summary, there was a video that went viral. A woman was seen beating a small boy and then dragging him, locking him in the dog's cage with other dogs, even though she's denied it in this report. Let's go through that story today.
Not other dogs, just dogs.
Because he's not a dog.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, because he's not a dog.
Thank you, Nnamdi.
Look, my first reaction is, where will we be without social media? Really and truly. Too often, justice comes to people just because of advocacy online, whether it be police abuse or domestic abuse or some other abuse of authority and of power. Where will we be without social media? And the answer to that is clear, right? And when you look at the numbers of people who are on social media versus the entire population, you realize that abuses of this nature are rife, and many of them are going unchecked, right? How do other countries deal with? We keep saying this: where there are no laws, where there's no law, there's no offense, in a sense. Do you get? Where there are no checks and balances, human beings will behave in any manner and any way they want to. Other parts, the developed world, what we call the developed world, they've gone through the cycle. Once in a while, these things, even with all their, institutions, these kind of things can happen from time to time. Now, imagine a situation where we don't have any of this. We don't have any social workers dedicated to anyone in society. First of all, not to talk of the least or the most vulnerable people in society, like children and women. There are no health workers. You can't. Bottom line, this doesn't even have to be an orphan in this country. You can treat your own children if you want, and nobody can call you to order. In a sense, there will be clear abuse going on if nobody takes it up and turns it. If there are no advocates for it, it doesn't get dealt with. But
However, but in Lagos State, Sunday, we have the Lagos State DSVRT, that's Domestic and Sexual Violence Response Team, who are the ones that actually responded to this. In recent times, under the leadership of Lola Roseviver Adeni, she's been fantastic. And with regards to...
You're absolutely right, but it's reactive.
Okay.
It's reactive. Countries are going to a place where it is proactive. You have health workers, social workers going to homes to go and check.
Yes.
There is in schools when they notice that the child is suffering from abuse or is no longer attentive.
At least
they ask questions.
They are very conscious.
They raise it.
Very true. And there's an awareness for people to
Absolutely.
report incidents.
Report these incidents. This is where you should report it. Most people don't know this institution even exists.
Yes.
Even if we're still in the reactive phase, most people don't know it exists. We need to move beyond that. But can we afford it? I mean, look, we are in the developing world for a reason. We're talking about not having money to dedicate towards healthcare. Do you understand? The way we've dealt with it in this part of the country before is that when they say the community, the village raises the child, the community does. But we're moving out of that. We're no longer we're now more people living in cities. There's a lot of urbanization going on. It can't happen in the same way. We need to try to evolve, especially in our big cities.
And it circles back to the conversation around social safety nets. And we keep talking about this on a daily basis. Zubi Modi sent in a message here on Twitter. It says, those are graduates that can't recite the alphabet. Guess where they will be employed? Government establishments. Police, etc. Not surprised that the institutions do not work. We have more messages here. Yomi Akara Kiri says, really? We don't have Gary in surplus? These are analysts. An average Nigerian do not live on imported goods or imported foods.
I think people don't have the reality of how much food we actually import. We don't know the real balance. Maybe we'll talk about that very shortly. But Nnamdi, let me come to you for our next story. Inmates of Keffi Prisons attempt mass jailbreak over alleged poor feeding. Vanguard newspaper, in the wake of the president's recent ascent to the prison before Nigerian Correctional Service. Can you please just touch on this story?
Sometimes I wonder if we're living in a Franz Kafka novel in Nigeria or in a Salvador Dali painting or something, because this story is funny. It says inmates attempted mass jailbreak from a prison in Keffi, Nasarawa, because they weren't getting adequate food, sanitation, water, and so on and so forth. But what this story is trying to get us to believe is that people who were in jail broke out not to get free, but because inside jail they weren't getting enough food and water. It's kind of,
It's counterintuitive.
isn't it a little weird?
It is.
But that's the first part of the paradox. The second part of the paradox is that they have tried to pretend as if the issue here was not that the security was poor at the prison. That is why there was a mass attempted jailbreak, because the whole situation was iffy to start with. Let's just be very, very straightforward about it. And instead of trying to create a more complex discussion around this, what they have done is to reduce it to some very simple things which you would buy if you weren't really thinking about it. I don't think there's any prison in the world, no matter how great, where if they could get their freedom, people would not try to break out.
Absolutely.
That's just my view.
Thank you, Nnamdi.
Thank you, Nnamdi. Sheung says the 14,000 naira per day spent on prisoners is not enough. Is the money applied? That should be the next
Trust me, most of that is not spent on him.
Ada says we import a little Gary too. But thank you so much for your messages. A special thanks to our analysts at Mista Ceee, Mista Ceee on Twitter, and Tunde Okufi is at Big Hopes on Twitter, and then Nnamdi is Nnamdi AK. Next, we talk sports inside of the locker room. Thank you for joining us on Freshly Press 91.
On that food security thing, people just don't know.
They don't.
People have no idea.
They don't. They don't
People
know how
have
much.
no
We
idea.
import toothpick. How much more salt?
But
we import salt.
The original
People have
statement,
no
the original
idea. We import
statement
pomo.
was
Yes.
general. He didn't say we're food sufficient in certain areas.
Sorry, is that
No,
Mr.
no, he
Rolling?
didn't. Too. Let me
He's just
draw.
making-
Let me draw. He said that we had food security. Oh,
Simple.
I just didn't want to go
Simple.
back and forth. He said,
He said we have
and even
food
then he now highlighted those states.
Yes.
He said about Chip that he's happy. He commends the policies that have been put in place. How could this
I'm
say
sure
that?
there's
They're not food
I'm sure
sufficient.
he has
And
no,
then you should
he
have-
has
you
no
should